morning, everybody. I'm incredibly excited this morning to have Bill Lewis here to speak with us for a little bit. Bill is a legendary leader in the financial services space. He's somebody, when I was coming up, I looked to as an example of what was possible. He is a pioneer in so many ways, and we'll touch on a lot of the different initiatives that Bill has spearheaded in his own journey and career. But let's first start by giving him a round of applause for coming in and being here with us. So as I mentioned, it's a privilege to have you here, Bill. Thank you for coming in. I'm going to give a little bit of Bill's background and biography, and then we're going to jump into some questions about your story and your journey and how we at Cadre can continue to further our mission of expanding access to real estate investments for more people. For those of you who don't know, Bill is on the board of Harvard Management Company, and we're incredibly grateful and privileged to have Harvard as an investor in our business. And it was really in that context that I got to know Bill over the past year, and we'll talk some more about your work there. But in addition to being on the board, Bill is managing director and co-chairman at Lazard, one of the leading investment banks in the world. Prior to that, he was senior executive at Morgan Stanley, where he was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right here, the first black man to rise to the position of MD. Is that accurate?
First black person
to rise to the position of MD. See, that's why I made sure I wasn't off here. And in addition, Bill is a tremendous leader, an investor, philanthropist. He was co-chair of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. He supports a lot of different organizations, including A Better Chance, which I also want to talk a bit about, Uncommon Schools, and the New York City Police Foundation. Bill is someone who he knows what it means to pay it forward. He's given back in so many ways, and oftentimes it goes unseen, but I know I'm in many ways a byproduct of a lot of Bill's leadership and his example. So, Bill, we're excited to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We want to dive right in because we know we have some time limits. And I want to start really with your journey, and understand how you ascended to the positions you're in. You started, you're from Richmond, Virginia, both, sons of the South. You came of age during the Civil Rights Movement. And I'm curious just to get your perspective as to how you've seen the world change, since your youth, and what you're most optimistic about, just more broadly speaking, maybe what you're concerned about in this day and age.
How much time do we have?
We're flexible.
Good. Well, Ryan, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here. I must say the only time I see a crowd this young is when we are welcoming our young people at Lazard who are out of college and out of graduate school. So it's always good to be among young people. I have 3 young adult children. So yes, my journey started in Richmond, Virginia, 2 years after Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. I was born in 1956. And so in many ways, I am a product of the modern civil rights movement, which people sort of mark as beginning with Brown v. Board of Education. I spent the first 14 years of my life in Richmond going to segregated schools because notwithstanding Brown, the South was incredibly slow to follow the mandate of the Supreme Court, which said to desegregate with all deliberate speed. Having said that, I have no regrets about the education that I got in Richmond, Virginia. K through 8, all African-American teachers, virtually all African-American students, because the South was so segregated, there were very few professional opportunities for African-American adults other than teaching, if you will. There were lawyers and doctors, but there certainly weren't investment bankers. And so the best and the brightest were teaching, and so I had great teachers from K through 8. And I learned about boarding school through the A Better Chance program, ABC, which was started in 1963, which was collaboration among elite New England boarding schools and some colleges. Dartmouth was one of the leading colleges to collaborate to find largely African-American kids from around the country who they felt could thrive in a New England boarding school environment. And so I went to Andover for 4 years and then to Harvard College. And out of Harvard College, I then went on the board of A Better Chance. And that was really my first opportunity to start giving back. So I think one key message that I always like to leave with young people is that it's never too early to start giving back and to start paying forward. I will say at age 22, I had no idea what it meant to be on a board, on a not-for-profit board. And I was probably 2 or 3 years too early, but I enjoyed it tremendously. And I don't know, 10 or 15 years later, I actually became the chairman of A Better Chance. So that sort of launched my, my journey, if you will, from segregated Richmond to the North, to elite education and an understanding of what education can do in terms of creating opportunities. I sit on the board of 10 not-for-profits now, 5 of which are dedicated to education. So 50 years later, I still believe strongly that education above all else is the key to creating opportunity. It's the great equalizer, if you will.
You know, you, like myself, are a Harvard alum. You know, I think it was Du Bois who said, you know, he was at Harvard but not of Harvard. You talked a little bit about the cultural, social changes. How did you navigate, you know, that environment? You know, where did you get the mental fortitude to, you know, prosper despite a lot of the adversity I'm sure that you encountered that was direct and indirect? And any advice, you know, for anybody here who's, you know, stepping into maybe different environment and circumstance and trying to figure out how to succeed despite, you know, what's going on in the world?
I was 14 when I got to Andover. You were 18 when you got to Harvard, presumably. And young people are adaptable. Young people are resilient. And that's why, once again, I think it's just so important to sort of grab people when they're young on both sides of the divide. And I think one of the benefits, to the extent we can look for any silver linings during COVID, if you will, is a resiliency that we've seen from young people like yourself. My kids, 2 were in school. One was at Harvard Business School, one was at Harvard College when all this happened and they shut down, and they just turned on a dime and they adjusted. And so we all face adversity. We all have to keep adversity in perspective. You're resilient, you're strong, and you will find ways to get through this no matter what.
So finance, you jumped into the financial services industry. When did you know you wanted to get into that space, and you know, when did you make that decision? Because, you know, clearly it was the right decision given your career and where you've ascended to. But how did that calculation happen?
Well, it's a good question, and I've always tried to sort exactly out when was the moment that it was going to be finance versus economics. So I majored in economics, or as they say at Harvard, I concentrated in economics, and I thought I was going to be a professor. And I was working on a senior honors thesis my senior year in college, and somewhere during that process, I had an epiphany that I really wasn't interested in doing much more research and being an academician. But I had sort of missed the deadlines for interviewing with various corporations that were coming on campus, and the people at whatever it's called, Office of Career Services or something like that. Yeah, is that what it's still called that?
Still called
Okay,
that, OCS,
right.
yeah.
Okay. Were able to get me 2 or 3 interviews. McKinsey, Morgan Stanley, and what was then called First Boston. And I very quickly decided, oh, and Procter & Gamble. And I very quickly decided that, that I liked the two-year analyst program that the investment banks had. It was short-term in nature. You didn't have to make any long-term decisions. First Boston said no, Morgan Stanley said yes, and that's how I decided on finance.
Gotcha, I got it. And you know, one of the things that I think has been top of mind, you sort of touched on it recently, is within the financial services space, the lack of diversity. You know, the lack of women, minorities, and positions of power, and just generally. It feels like we may be reaching a turning point in some way, in terms of at least the awareness of some of these issues over the last year. But you've been, an advocate and a change maker in many ways throughout the years in getting minorities and women into the financial services space. I guess one of the questions I have is, what have you seen, what's been most effective? Clearly you've had some real impact in some effective techniques and increasing diversity in the pipeline. What have you done? What has worked? What hasn't worked? What can we learn as we look to build a more inclusive organization as well? I
worked with a group of people to come up with a program that allowed us to focus on 4 or 5 HBCUs, where we created a program with Morehouse and Spelman, and we were the first to do this back in the early 90s, with Morehouse and Spelman, Howard, FAMU, Florida A&M University, and the University of Texas at Austin, because they had a heavy Hispanic population. And we identified kids as sophomores in college with the view that we were going to adopt them, that we were going to pay for their junior year and senior year in colleges and give them a paid internship during the summer, which in effect was going to be just a summer-long interview and a chance for them to sort of tag along and see what we do and to learn the lingo, so that when they started interviewing in their senior years, they would have a familiarity. And we didn't do it just for our benefit. We fully understood that we wouldn't be able to hire all the kids that we were trying to expose the workings of the street to. And that program was amazingly successful, so successful that every other firm on the street had basically imitated it within 2 or 3 years. There are no trademarks or patents around intelligence when it comes to Wall Street. And so, as you guys know, every firm has some sort of program, some sort of variation on that theme. And it's an arms race. They're now sort of going after freshmen and juniors and seniors in high school. And that's all fine. I mean, you cannot start too early with this sort of exposure. So that was one end of the spectrum in terms of creating opportunities for people of color who, for any number of reasons, just weren't getting the right looks. Fast forward to today, and I went on the board of the Harvard Management Company, which is the largest endowment in the world, over $50 billion now. But I did start to realize that many of my friends are what they would call diverse asset managers, and they were telling me how difficult it was to get a look at Harvard and other elite endowments and foundations. And along with Ken Chenault and Ted Wells, who sat on the board of the Harvard Corporation, which is the overarching governing organization at Harvard, the three of us decided that we could show leadership at Harvard, that Harvard has always claimed to be a leader in almost anything that it sets out to do. And Harvard has shown leadership with respect to affirmative action and diversity across the entire university. 4 of the 10 deans are African Americans, needs blind admissions so that they can find the best students wherever they are. I mean, you could just sort of run through Harvard's track record and say that this is a model for any academic institution that takes DEI seriously. And so we very simply put in place a process, some dedicated people, which basically said, we are going to make ourselves available to any manager of color, because it's not like we're talking about, Harvard screens, 50,000 high school seniors a year for 1,600 seats. So Harvard, broadly speaking, knows how to handle a lot of applications, for lack of a better word. And we're not talking about 50,000 diverse managers. So we very quickly figured out a system to identify and to get every sort of serious manager of color, every sort of serious diverse manager into a process at Harvard where we could not only sort out their relevance and their track record, but also give them feedback. Because the vast, and this is a very, very important point, the vast majority of people are going to be told no. That's just the way, just like all the kids who apply to Harvard. The vast majority are told no. And so the challenge for a Harvard is to figure out how to tell somebody no without that sort of boomeranging and being perceived as a negative. But more importantly, how to give those people feedback, constructive feedback for how they might be able to get to yes. Now, there are some cases where you'll never get to yes. Real estate is a tough class for Harvard. And so a generic real estate fund is going to be told no, and it's always going to be no. Cadre brings a different sort of wrinkle to real estate, as did David Grain at Grain Management. And so if you can come with a mousetrap that says, I know this looks like real estate, but it really isn't real estate, then all of a sudden Harvard's ears perks up. And that's what happened with Cadre.
It sounds like it took you, Ken, and others really pushing the envelope on action. How do you think about scaling the model that you're employing at Harvard to others?
Yeah, it's a great question. Putting aside Harvard, putting aside Morgan Stanley, it really does require people to be a real pain in the butt. It is, and I'm not talking about Harvard specifically, I'm not talking about Morgan Stanley, I'm just talking about creating change. The status quo is just so easy. We wake up in the morning, we have routines, and we wake up in the morning and we come to work and we do things and we're successful, and we've been rewarded, and all of a sudden people are saying we got to do it differently, and that's just hard. So first and foremost, you need change agents with thick skin who are prepared to be yelled at, prepared to be told no for sure. As it relates to the endowment world, Harvard is incredibly fortunate to have a president in Larry Bacow, to have board members at the corporation like Ken Chenault and Ted Wells, and then to have an alignment with the endowment itself from sort of my angle and the angles of a few other people. That model really isn't replicable, unfortunately. It's just so hard to move things from the inside that if you are on the outside, regardless of how well-intended you are, even if you're a big donor, the momentum, the inertia are so great that that you will not be able to accomplish anything substantially. So that's the unfortunate reality. You need allies on the inside. Now, having said that, you've got a number of external efforts that are trying to bring pressure to bear. Congress, There were two congressmen early in 2020 who sent questionnaires to the 25 largest endowment asking about diversity. And that's good. That's sort of part of the effort. There are a couple of sort of trade associations. Bob Green at the National Association for Investment Companies is doing a lot of work. There's a guy named Robert Rabin. And so they are all good. But the problem is so complex that until you've got serious people on the inside rowing with you, it's going to be challenging. And by the way, when I wear my Harvard hat thinking about diversity, the notion of finding diverse managers is just one piece of the equation. And it may not be the most important piece, to be honest. What could make a much greater difference is the diversity within the asset managers themselves. So I might say to you, how many African Americans do you have sitting in the audience? That's a challenge for diverse managers because it's not just sort of who owns the most stock in the company, but how are opportunities being created within those managers? Because we've all heard about the Tiger funds. Well, Julian Robinson created billionaires, with sort of giving so many people an opportunity to learn their craft under him and then to go out and start their own funds. And so in a lot of ways, I think that could be the Holy Grail. And we at Harvard are we're surveying all of our managers, asking them specifically, what are they doing to take diversity seriously?
What is your view on the role of leadership, CEOs, as it relates to issues about corporate social responsibility, diversity? I mean, you've been outspoken with voting rights and the like. That's something that historically, at least I know in my seat, it wasn't expected, of a leader or of companies. How do you see, that evolving, and is it important for companies to be speaking out on some of these issues of civil rights and social and economic justice? Should we stay focused on, executing? How do you balance that?
Well, as you know, it's become hotly debated. It's become hotly partisan. My view is leadership means leadership, and you have to set a standard at the top. You have to live your values, and you can't ring fence certain values. What I and a number of other senior African American executives did back in the spring was lead an effort around voting rights. Well, we're talking democracy. We're talking about the foundation of our country. There's nothing partisan about democracy. We didn't say, we didn't point to a particular party or a particular congressperson. We simply said everybody should have the right to vote. Voting should be easy. Elections should be, secure. Fraud should be tough. But I don't think a leader can step away from a bedrock principle of our nation's founding, and that is democracy. Now, it gets tougher depending on the issue, but democracy is a pretty easy issue. And if we can't agree that we're all for democracy and that we're all for making sure people get an opportunity to reasonably exercise their right to vote, then I think we're in a pretty bad place. We also know that that the notion that Milton Friedman espoused 50 years ago about the corporation being sort of a tool, if you will, solely for the benefit of shareholders, that thinking has largely been dismissed. We know that we have stakeholders, starting with our employees and our customers. And without happy employees, without happy customers, there's nothing there for the shareholder. So this notion of a corporation existing solely for the shareholder is probably has faded. I don't think any CEO takes the view that he or she comes to work every day with only one constituency in mind. And once you appreciate that you as a CEO in showing leadership have got to figure out how to balance the interests of your many stakeholders, then I don't think you can dodge certain issues. Ultimately, ESG, the environment, nobody's going to be able to dodge climate, which is right up there with voting. And so I do think a CEO has to be careful in terms of how much time he or she devotes to those issues. You've got to set the tone at the top. You've got to make it clear to your employees what the values of the company are. But ultimately, you've got to figure out how to make money, and a lot of it. And so you've got to figure out how to balance them.
Well, I know we are running up on time. I want to thank you personally, Bill. You know, you are somebody I've looked to for a while as a mentor and someone who can show what's possible through grit and through resilience. I know I speak on behalf of our entire company, and we're grateful for you, for Harvard's investment in us. We're going to work tirelessly to make you some money. And, you know, we thank you again for your time, for your insights, and we look forward to growing together with you into a brighter future. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Ryan. Glad to be here, guys.
Thank you.